in some ways it was really different and kind of like a mixture of all of them into one. So just to kind of put it in perspective, the very first one was the debut. So it's that old saying, you have your entire sort of like life to make that one. The second one was, I wouldn't say rush, but it wasn't the most enjoyable experience just because we were still touring the first record, which was really successful in the States especially. So all of our time off was spent in the studio making demos, and it was a real challenge. And of course there was the pressure for the follow-up, but I think we can, all agree as a group that we did an amazing effort, and it was a great record. And then the third album was completely different, where it wasn't even meant to be, quote, an album. And we had 10 days booked in a studio with our producer, John Levine, who has a studio at his house. And we were meant to record and write 2 or 3 songs. And then by day 5, we had conjured up like 7 songs that were all like originals. And we were like, oh my gosh, like there's a little bit of lightning here in a bottle. And that just became a very obscure but yet unique record, which was a complete reflection on the lockdown and everything that we were going through. Exactly. Hence why it's just bursting at the seams with all of our friends that we had met over the years. And we wanted to do that. So with this 4th album, we decided a few things. First of all, we wanted just to keep it really back to basics, like the first record, like no features or anything like that. And we were going to take more time than 10 days to create like an 11-track album. So most of the writing was done over a span of about 18 months. Some of the demos were existing pre-pandemic, like 2019. There's a couple of songs that were floating in the Struts universe that were pretty old, that every band has, like these kind of ideas that you just can't seem to get right. And we managed to get those ones right, plus some really fresh ideas and some things that had also been floating around, like I said, in 2019. But the biggest difference is that it was done all in one studio, and we were co-producers on the record, so we had a lot of control in terms of the arrangements and the sonics and exactly what we wanted. And we had like a huge variety of material to pick from, some of which didn't make the record, which was still really, really great songs. But I think it's the best aspects of our debut, which showcases the band's songwriting. But yet, unlike the first, I think it captures way more than any other record, like how we feel and sound live, which is something that I know our immediate fan base has just been craving for, and I think we absolutely delivered that on this latest record. Yeah, totally. I mean, with the efforts of Scott Borchett, who's obviously the head of Big Machine, and Julian Raymond as well, both are also co-producers on this album. They were completely instrumental in pushing us, helping us to sort of like pursue certain songs and ideas when the band might have sort of like second guessed themselves. So that really proved to be extremely helpful. And yeah, in many ways, it's just as much as their album as it is ours. It really wasn't. I mean, if it was up to us, I think the band even now would still be writing and creating more demos, because we always put ourselves under immense pressure to sort of have those songs that are an immediate, wow, this one is the single, for instance. But speaking of Scott, for instance, he called me up and he just said, Luke, like, we have so much material here. There were like 40 plus demos at that time. And he just said, look, we're going to book you in for 10 days in Nashville with some amazing people, and I'm going to be there as well. And let's just sort of lay down like what we all can agree are great tracks and not layer over the demos. We're going to start all over again, and use them as reference points. And in doing so, once you've laid down 2 to 3, 4 of like the strongest demos, so to speak, it will naturally sort of show where we need to go. And he was right. It was like by the time we'd done a few of these songs, especially like the singles, for instance, it was like, okay, well, we're missing something with this feel. We're missing something with that. And we could just sort of pick and choose. But yeah, it was a bit of a difficult process because, for instance, the song Pretty Vicious was made out of the thought process that I really wanted to push the band into new sort of pathways and places that we hadn't gone before. And there were a lot of demos and songs and ideas that were in that vein. But I think we collectively thought that being our 4th album, not being able to sort of put a record out and tour it since 2018, we had to come back with like a balls to the wall, for the most part, rock record, like I said, with no features, and just show to the world that we're not one-trick ponies and that we can sort of come back and possibly deliver our strongest album to date. I know it might sound cliche, but that there is a reason why Pretty Vicious was the album title as well, and that was completely intentional. There were a lot of titles being thrown around, like Remember the Name, The Struts, and things like this, which are plays on words that, to be quite honest, we'd done before with like the first EP, Have You Heard, and Everybody Wants, the debut record. And I just thought, no, we need to sort of showcase this song because it's equally as strong as a track as some of our other singles that we've done in the past, but yet it's not a Could Have Been Me. It's not a Body Talk. It's not Kiss This. It's something really unique unto itself. And I wanted to make that the spotlight of the album. So I think Pretty Vicious as a song is definitely the one to go check out. But I think a song that encapsulates everything on the record could probably be the opening track, Too Good at Raising Hell. They were all really unique in their own ways. It's really hard to kind of pick one. Kesha was one of the big first ones that we did, and she's just great. She's just amazing, super talented. I'd have to say probably the most unique one and dare say the most unexpected would have been Robbie Williams, who I don't know if you're completely aware of. I mean, he has this great new series out on Netflix, which, funny enough, I was watching the whole thing last night, and it was a real eye-opener and sort of reminded me of like how much of a big deal that was to sort of have him on that song. But it was amazing because the time in which we did that was so obscure and everyone was sort of filled with paranoia about COVID, and recording what would become the lead vocals on his doorstep in his Beverly Hills mansion in LA was just something that is never going to happen again. And I have great memories with him, and he's a really top guy. And yeah, the song came out really well, and it did a lot for us in the United Kingdom and carved out a pathway which I guess in many ways we'd struggled to sort of to do ourselves up until that point. In all honesty, and I've said this a few times, I think that there's something about music and fashion that really go hand in hand. And what I love is when I think the Struts are at their best when we are somewhat slightly considered kind of like outsiders. And when we came out in 2014 and I was like fully glam, super androgynous, nobody was doing that. And that really sort of some people absolutely loved it, some people hated it, but it was great because wherever we were and wherever I was and wherever I walked into a room or went through a festival, everyone was sort of like looking around like, wow, like what's going on here? And I've definitely seen in the last sort of 3 years, a couple of things. I've seen some big bands like come up, like Maneskin and even Greta Van Fleet, for instance, have really gone down this kind of like super like glamorous road, which I think is really, really great. But I'm also seeing this androgynous thing being taken to a point where it's kind of hitting the mainstream to a point where it's not special for me anymore in my mind, if that makes any sense. And when I think about the band and I think about myself and what image I want to sort of like project, seeing that and being conscious of that definitely makes me sort of reevaluate, like, well, where do I want to go next? Because as far as I'm concerned, like, I have nothing to prove in that department. Like, and right now I'm just sort of finding a lot of joy in presenting myself in a bit more of a sophisticated sort of way, and dare say embracing more of like my masculinity, if that makes any sense. And I'm also sort of like quietly thinking about the next steps, and the way I see it is like there's going to be a point where the cultural zeitgeist, the audience, you know, they're gonna, the girls especially, I think they're gonna get fed up of all of these bands like constantly cross-dressing and just want to see guys be guys, you know, in the best way possible, in the most positive way. And that's kind of the angle that I'm focused on at the moment. It's really funny. It all depends on what color my hair is, as funny as that may seem, but it's the absolute truth. When I had black hair for quite a while, and during that time it was always Freddie Mercury, Joan Jett, sometimes Steven Tyler, Tim Curry in the Rocky Horror Picture Show. And since getting rid of the black hair, now it's turned into Rod Stewart and Tom Petty, a cheap version of Tom Petty, again Steven Tyler, Mick Jagger. But it used to sort of bother me slightly back in the early days because, you know, you just sort of like want to be known for you. But really, like now when I think about it, it's just human nature. And to be honest, it's a good thing, because if you pitch yourself in a bar and you get talking to someone, a complete stranger, and you love a certain group, you know, what are you going to do? You tell them, like, it sounds a bit like this and a bit like this, and the singer's a bit like this and a bit like this person. So comparisons, as, you know, annoying they can be at times, are actually also a great tool to introduce the group to new people. So I don't really have a problem with that. At least I'm being compared to the creme de la creme, you know? So my day off will look like, a typical day off will be, I'll get up, well, I mean, let's just do yesterday, for instance. So this will normally be my typical day. So that between 9 and 9:30, I may have some sort of like international Zoom interviews to do until like midday, and then I will check into like the hotel. I'll do like a 6-mile run, and then I'll eat around about 3 or 4 p.m. and I'll just sort of like sit and watch television, really, and just rest my voice and work my way back to the bus at some point in the early evening, and get to bed at about 10 p.m. That's what I did yesterday anyway, but that's my normal typical day off. Probably one of the very first ones that I actively saved up for and bought the ticket like with my own hard worked money would have been to see The Darkness headline Reading Festival in 2003. And I worked as a hotel porter for about 4 months or so, on minimum wage at the Walton Park Hotel in Clevedon with my best mate. And yeah, that was the very first show that I'd really sort of, like I said, bought my own ticket for. And it was great. We managed to work our way all the way to the front row. But that day in particular was great. It was the first day I saw the Hives for the very first time. The Offspring, I believe, were main support. And yeah, another thing that I remember is that the Rasmus that weekend got bottled off stage, if I'm not mistaken, which was completely random, bit harsh. But yeah, that was the first one, you know, and I'm still a big fan of The Darkness till this day. And it's been really great. I'm in touch with Justin, and at the Taylor Hawkins tribute show, we had some great sort of like one-on-one time, and it's still a bit surreal that I have like one of my childhood heroes like in my phone. You know, it's great. Gosh, Brian May. I don't know if I should be saying this, but I have Brian, who I talk to from time to time. Josh from Queens of the Stone Age. Of course, like Justin. Who else? Nikki Sixx. It's a valuable phone contact list. Yeah, I won't say any more because it may or may not get higher than that in rank, and I don't want to be sort of like held at knife point for my phone. Is that where we are in Wisconsin? Gosh, I wouldn't know. It really all blends into one. I can barely remember. In fact, I was just saying this to one of our crew members who's really only been out with us earlier this year. And it's funny, like once you spend 2 months with someone, and it's the same with the shows and the towns and the places. I was saying to him like, oh, were you there like a year ago when we did that show in New York or something? He was like, no, I've only started this year. It all begins to sort of like melt into one, if that makes sense. And it's the same with the places. No disrespect to Wisconsin at all. You know, it's just, yeah, like I said to you earlier, I don't really get the chance to walk around and explore. I just have too much responsibility and just so focused on the show and giving the audience their money's worth that that's my top priority, you know. I try to stay off cheese, if I'm honest. It's just not very good for the voice, and I smoke cigarettes, and you got to pick one, and I'd rather smoke cigarettes. But when I do have a bit of cheese, maybe at like Christmas and whatnot, my mum got me onto blue cheese. I never liked it growing up, but I now appreciate the the real acquired like taste of it. So I'd say that one, yeah. Yeah, a good roast dinner. It's for those of you who don't know what a Sunday roast is, it's pretty much what the Americans have when celebrating Thanksgiving, but the British have sort of like a slightly modified version every Sunday. And there was a place in LA that did a really great roast dinner. It was an British themed pub, but unfortunately they closed down. So I might be filling that gap in the market and open up my own British pub in LA at some point with a proper roast dinner. I play it when I can. I used to go and see Bristol City when I was a young lad. Quite a few times, which is where I grew up, and had a lot of fond memories actually watching them. It was always, you know, they weren't very good then, and they're not exactly amazing now either. They're not like a big time team, but it was always like a great atmosphere. I used to play five-a-side a lot in my sort of like mid-teens, which proved to be really helpful when I started like doing shows with my school band, and it meant that like my cardio was in pretty good shape, so I could sort of run around the stage in my early shows. I mean, it has to be David Beckham, really, doesn't it? Did you see the series?
Oh, not yet. That's
It's fantastic. I mean, in terms of his legacy, I found it incredibly inspiring, actually, and it was something that I really recommended that the other chaps in the band watch, because it just really puts into perspective the sort of flow that people have in their career, whether that's being an athlete, whether that's being in music, acting, whatever it is. It's like you're going to have highs and you're going to have lows, and what really matters is what those people do in the low points, when things aren't really, the jobs aren't coming in, or you know, you might be disliked by your public, for instance, like David Beckham was. So I think it was very inspiring, and I do find him an inspiring person. Gosh, a poet. I'd be some broke poet, maybe living in some loft in Paris, you know, chasing women and drinking lots of wine and collecting muses and just writing from the heart, and probably die starving.